Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 282 Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev is only a couple weeks away, and this video is going to be the top 3 reasons I love UFC 282. I already had recorded this video and was getting ready to release it when the news came out about Jiri Prochazka being injured and pulling out of his fight against Glover Teixeira. So basically, after that happened, my video was completely outdated. It made absolutely no sense. 2 of my reasons just did not work anymore because of the Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira fight being canceled. For those of you who don't know, Jiri Prochazka has a shoulder injury, a serious shoulder injury. Supposedly he's going to be out somewhere between 6 and 12 months. He had to pull out of the fight. They offered Glover Teixeira to fight Magomed Ankalaev for the undisputed light heavyweight title since Jiri Prochazka vacated. Glover Teixeira did not want to fight Magomed Ankalaev on 2 weeks' notice, and I don't blame him. So they elevated the co-main event, which was originally Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev. They've elevated that to the main event, and they will fight for the undisputed light heavyweight title. It's an unfortunate series of events. I was really looking forward to seeing Jiri Prochazka fight. I did an entire video on this breaking news the day it happened. I will link that video down in the description. But I'm going to tell you my original 2 reasons that I love UFC 282 before I get into my full list of 3 now, because those 2 reasons are now completely obsolete. The second reason on my list originally when I recorded this video was the fact that the co-main and the main event, which was a title fight, were in the same division. I love when they do that. Basically, they have a #1 contender fight on the same card of whatever #1 contender fight title is being defended. So they had the main event, was a light heavyweight title fight, Jiri Prochazka, Glover Teixeira. Co-main event, light heavyweight fight for the #1 contender spot. I absolutely love when the UFC does that, has everyone on the same schedule. And I was really looking forward to seeing that play out, because now you see an impressive performance in the Jan Blachowicz-Magomed Ankalaev fight, and then you get to see an impressive performance in the main event, maybe between Jiri and Glover, whoever wins. And then you're like, oh, I cannot wait to see these 2 fighters who just look like absolute savages and won, however they may have won, super dominantly or whatever may have happened. And now you get to imagine them matching up in the future. Unfortunately, that reason makes no sense anymore because Jiri Prochazka is out. That fight is no longer happening. So we're not getting a #1 contender fight for the same division of the title that's being defended in the main event. Super unfortunate. And then the #1 reason that I was excited for UFC 282, the #1 reason I love UFC 282 originally in the original video, was the fact that Jiri Prochazka was fighting. Because I don't care who Jiri Prochazka is fighting, it is must watch. He's one of the most exciting fighters I've ever seen. He may be the most exciting fighter in MMA right now. I mean, it took him 3 fights to get to a title. I mean, he won the title in his 3rd UFC fight. I mean, the fight against Volkan Ozdemir, his UFC debut, absolutely incredible, crazy knockout. The second fight against Dominic Reyes, crazy sprinting back elbow KO, absolute insanity. And then he fights Glover Teixeira earlier this year at UFC 275 in one of the greatest MMA fights I've ever seen, and definitely the greatest light heavyweight title fight I've ever seen. And now it sucks because he's out of the card. He's one of the most exciting fighters I've ever seen, and I was really looking forward to seeing him fight regardless of who he fought. So those 2 reasons don't work anymore. So now I'm going to get to my actual list that pertains to the new UFC 282 card. So one of the reasons is still the same reason that was originally on the list, but we'll get to that in a second. I'm going to go from 3 to 1, 1 being the reason I most love UFC 282, but I'm going to start with 3. But before I get into any of that, comment down below and let me know the reasons you love UFC 282. I know it's kind of, it's not looking as good as it once was, but I think it's still an okay card, and I still found a few reasons that I am super excited for this card. Also, about maybe 4 days ago, I did the top 3 reasons I hate UFC 282. I feel like I could do another video and kind of update it with the new main card, or the new card in general, how they reshuffled it around. They have the undisputed light heavyweight title between Blachowicz and Ankalaev. Let me know if you would like to see me redo that video as well. For right now, I'm not doing it, but if you would like to see me redo the top 3 reasons I hate UFC 282, let me know down in the comments. So starting off with the number 3 reason I absolutely love UFC 282, and this has not changed. This was on my original list as number 3. And this is that the prelims are absolutely stacked. You look at the early prelims. You have Billy Quarantillo versus Alexander Hernandez. Amazing fight, fan-friendly fight. Really looking forward to that matchup. Opening up the regular prelims, you have Chris Curtis versus Joaquin Buckley. Not only is this a fan-friendly matchup, not only is this a super exciting fight on paper, but this is also very relevant to the UFC middleweight division. Chris Curtis is currently ranked number 14 in the middleweight division. Joaquin Buckley, I believe he's coming off that win he's coming off the loss to Nasruddin Imavov. He has to get a win here in the middleweight division. And he's taking on Chris Curtis, who has looked very good. He's coming off a loss against Jack Hermanson, but he took the fight on short notice. And there's absolutely no way that Chris Curtis versus Joaquin Buckley is boring. And that's a can't-miss fight. And that's opening up the prelims. That is insane. Then you also have on the prelims Shabazian versus Dalcha. Edmund Shabazian, I know he's kind of been on the downslope of his career, but he's a very exciting fighter to watch, and I'm really looking forward to that matchup. Then you also have Raul Rosas Jr., the 17-year-old the UFC signed off of the Contender Series. I believe he's 18 years old now, making his official UFC debut against Jay Perrin. And I know a lot of people are going to think, oh, this is a set-up fight for Raul Rosas Jr. to get a win in the UFC. The UFC's promoting him. Jay Perrin is no easy fight. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Raul Rosas Jr. fight at UFC 282, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him test it against Jay Perrin. It's going to be very interesting to see an 18-year-old, just barely an adult, making his UFC debut. Going to be very interesting. And then main eventing the prelims, you have a heavyweight fight between Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Chris Daukaus. Now, while I don't think this is going to be the most technical fight, there's a very high probability you could get an absolute brutal KO in this fight. And the heavyweights, there's always that anticipation and that tension during the fight of it takes one punch, one zig when you should have zagged, and next thing you know, you are brutally KO'd. And that's just the prelims. That is better than some of the recent UFC fight night cards. I mean, Mackenzie Dern, Yan Xiaonan, Alexa Grasso, Viviane Araujo. I mean, these prelims for UFC 282 are better than some of those terrible UFC fight night cards we've got recently. So I'm really looking forward to the prelims, and that's why that's my number 3 reason on the list, because I am absolutely in love with these prelims. They are super deep. Moving down my list to the number 2 reason I love UFC 282, and that is that Magomed Ankalaev is getting a title shot. And I know that sounds crazy, and I know Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira was an amazing fight. I'm sure the rematch would have been pretty entertaining. I don't think it would have lived up to the first fight. But in my personal opinion, I would have rather seen Jiri Prochazka versus Magomed Ankalaev headlining UFC 282 to begin with. Because Glover Teixeira is 43 years old. He's taken a lot of damage. And I know I really shouldn't be looking at it like this, but if Glover Teixeira were to beat Jiri Prochazka at UFC 282, if the fight originally went ahead, I think Glover Teixeira probably was going to retire with the light heavyweight belt. And that just cast a shadow over the division that we just got out of with Jon Jones. If Glover Teixeira were to reclaim his belt against Jiri at UFC 282, there is a chance he just retires right there in the octagon, leaves with the belt, and kind of leaves the light heavyweight division in shambles. And, I get it. I love Glover Teixeira. He's a fan favorite. I was so happy to see him win the belt against Jan Blachowicz at UFC 267. But I felt like, he's getting up there in age. He was winning the fight against Jiri Prochazka before he got finished. One of the greatest MMA fights of all time. I would have just liked to see him retire after that. And for me, the most compelling fight in the division, there's a couple compelling fights like Jiri Prochazka, Jan Blachowicz. But for me personally, the most compelling fight was Jiri Prochazka versus Magomed Ankalaev. Magomed Ankalaev has not lost since March of 2018 against Paul Craig. and that was a fight that he was winning, and in the third round got caught in a triangle. And since then, Magomed Ankalaev has been dominant. He's coming off 4 wins. Nikita Krylov, Volkan Ozdemir, Thiago Santos, Anthony Smith, 4 quality wins, and he's on a massive win streak. I believe it's a 9-fight win streak. So Magomed Ankalaev, he would have definitely gotten the title shot had he had a more impressive win over Anthony Smith, and he finished him in the second round. But there was that kind of looming over top of the fight that Anthony Smith got injured in the fight. So it was almost like, it didn't really count. I know that's what some people were thinking. And it wasn't as impressive as it could have been, basically because Anthony Smith got hurt in the fight. So I would have liked to seen Ankalaev fighting for the title to begin with. And I am very happy to see him fighting for the title now. If he goes out there, he beats Jan Blachowicz, we'll probably get Jiri Prochazka versus Magomed Ankalaev, depending on the timetable for Jiri Prochazka's return. And I'm really looking forward to that fight. The only thing that kind of sucks about that is, imagine being Jiri Prochazka. He's already been off for roughly 6-7 months. Imagine he's off for another 10 months. He's going to be off for a year and a half and have to come back to Magomed Ankalaev as a potential opponent. That kind of sucks. I would have liked to seen, it happen originally at UFC 282. But nonetheless, the 2 top guys outside of Jiri and Glover who are off the card are now fighting for the belt. And it's kind of weird because both of these guys in their last 2 fights have gotten weird wins. Jan Blachowicz got that win over Alexander Rakic, but Rakic got injured in his fight as well. It was a little bit different. So both these guys, are ranked in the top of the division, but both their opponents were injured in their last fight, and they didn't get that solidified win to kind of earn them that shot. But I'm super excited to see Magomed Ankalaev fighting for a title. I've had my eye on him for a while. I think he's a very good fighter, and I'm very interested to see how he does against Jan Blachowicz. And I thought Ankalaev was the most deserving next in line, even before this fight was booked, just because of his win streak. He only has 1 loss in 20 fights, and I really wanted to see him fighting for a belt. And Jan Blachowicz, I get it. You could say the same thing. A former champion. He beat Alexander Rakic, who's a top-ranked guy. But Jan Blachowicz did just get finished not that long ago by Glover Teixeira, and it was a dominant finish. So now we're going to get to see this fight, Ankalaev versus Blachowicz, a very compelling matchup, and I cannot wait for this fight. Moving on to my number 1 reason I love UFC 282, and this might catch a couple people off guard, but this is one of the most underrated matchups on the card. And the number 1 reason I love UFC 282 is because we are getting Bryce Mitchell versus Ilia Topuria. I absolutely love this fight. This is opening up the pay-per-view main card, and this is flying under the radar. This is one of my most anticipated non-title fights that is currently announced. It doesn't matter if it's this year, next year. I absolutely love this matchup. And I know people are thinking, oh, it's a striker versus grappler matchup. Everyone in the UFC pretty much, or all the UFC fans, think that Ilia Topuria is a striker. Because, in his 4 UFC fights, he's basically fought like a striker. He KO'd Damon Jackson. He KO'd Ryan Hall. He KO'd Jai Herbert. But Ilia Topuria is a very good jiu-jitsu and submission guy as well. Of his 12 wins, 7 of those are by submission. So I'm very curious how he matches up with Bryce Mitchell on the ground, because Bryce Mitchell, we know what he wants to do. He wants to come in, take you down, grind you out, look for a submission. And Topuria is very well rounded. He has heavy hands. He has knockout power. His striking is ever improving, but he has a great submission game and a great ground game as well. And you have 2 guys who are undefeated. Topuria, 12-0. Bryce Mitchell is currently 15-0. So 2 undefeated featherweight prospects in the division, vying to kind of prove themselves as a top 10 talent. And whoever wins this fight, I believe, is potentially 1 fight away. I know the division's a little clogged up right now with Alexander Volkanovski moving up to 55, and you have an interim title fight between Yair and Emmett. But I think the winner of Topuria versus Mitchell will be maybe 1 fight away from a featherweight title shot, depending on how the division plays out. And this is just my most anticipated fight on the card. I'm going to be quite honest. I am more looking forward to Tapori versus Mitchell more than I am looking forward to Blachowicz versus Ankalaev. Even though I am looking forward to Blachowicz versus Ankalaev, we talked about it in the last reason. But I absolutely love this fight. I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. Is Tapori just going to look to stuff the takedown and use his hands? Because, I mean, he's kind of fallen in love with his knockout power in his hands, and he went up to 55 in his last fight against Jai Herbert because it was on short notice. He looked completely undersized, and, you know, now he's moving back down to 45. He's fighting Bryce Mitchell, whose grappling looks unbelievable. He's coming off a win against Edson Barboza, looking better than ever in that fight. And I'm just really curious to see how stylistically this fight plays out. I want to know how it plays out. My favorite fights are when you get a lot of questions answered, and we're really going to get a lot of questions answered in this fight. We're getting, you know, the featherweight division is so stacked that you can put contenders like this against each other. You know, in other divisions where they're not as deep, the UFC will kind of baby a contender and kind of help them make their way to the top. And that, you know, in the featherweight division, we're getting to see them fight each other right now. And this could be a fight that we see down the line. It would not shock me if we see Tapori or Mitchell in a title fight in the future. It would not shock me seeing either one of these guys become a champion in the future. And this could be one of those fights in 3 years from now, we're seeing them rematch, and this time it's for a featherweight title. So I'm really looking forward to this matchup. It's my favorite fight on the card, and that's why it's my #1 reason I love UFC 282. Let me know what you guys think about my list. Am I absolutely crazy? Is it spot on? Also, don't forget to comment down below and let me know the reasons you love UFC 282. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like the video.